the moment her husband came through the grand doors. His power rolled forward, enveloping her. Standing in the midst of the party, with her back to the entrance, she felt rather than saw him cross the threshold into the ballroom. Her hands immediately started shaking. Not now. Gods, please, not now. Along the edges of the gorgeous room, men in black suits took their places quietly, blending in with her serving staff. Marcus's personal cadre of bodyguards. She recognized them because they'd once guarded her. The guests mingling near the entrance all turned, the men bowing and women fluttering as they greeted the man who secretly ruled the underworld of New Olympus, Marcus Ubelli. It had been 2 months since she'd seen or spoken to him, beyond the text she'd sent telling him she was leaving him as she fled his estate. Of course, she'd known that wouldn't be the end of it. This was Marcus Ubelli they were talking about. She'd spent the last 2 months laying low, knowing he could come for her at any moment. He hadn't, though. He'd respected her wishes. Or had it been some sort of game to him? She didn't want to play. She was tired of games. Done with them. Done with him and his world of shadows and violence. Marcus's dark head was still barely in the ballroom. He was surrounded by people, couples in tuxes and ball gowns who would pay homage to the king of the underworld. Men with solemn faces who wanted to shake his hand and whisper in his ear. Same as always. Of course, she'd known that eventually they'd run into each other. It was inevitable. She'd tried to brace herself for this moment. She'd gone over it 100 times in her head. 1,000 times. She thought she'd be ready. She'd been wrong. So wrong. Marcus raised his head. His storm-colored eyes swept over the crowded room. He was still surrounded by people, yet he hadn't forgotten her. He'd never forget. He was on the hunt. Goosebumps rose all over her skin and her heart raced. He was more gorgeous than ever, and even a ballroom away, she could feel the wash of power that always preceded his intimidating presence. Get out. She had to get out of here now. She glanced around, feeling frantic as she looked for an escape. But she was surrounded on all sides by beautiful, glittering people who were all but caging her in between the giant bouquets of peacock feathers and tables laden with crab and puff pastries. Armand had opened another spa, and to celebrate, talked one of his many admirers into opening their house for the extravaganza. The party was totally lush. He'd told Cora to spare no expense, and she hadn't. But now the excess was completely screwing with her need for a quick escape. There was a staircase on the far side of the ballroom. She could probably wind her way through the partiers to get there, but it would leave her exposed. Marcus might be able to approach her before she could get away. Still, she had to try. She couldn't stand here like a lamb waiting for the slaughter. She looked up at the tall guest in a white tux who'd been talking to her. "I'm sorry," she interrupted him, having no idea what he'd been saying.